right. Good afternoon, folks. My name is Annie Tillman. I'm the Adult Program Coordinator at the Schaumburg Library. We're so glad you're able to join us today. If you have any questions throughout the program, please feel free to use the chat box or the Q&A box that can be found at the bottom of your screen if you're watching on a computer. All right. Good afternoon, folks. My name is Annie Tillman. I'm the Adult Program Coordinator at the Schaumburg Library. So if you have any questions, please feel free to put those in the chat box, and we'll be able to answer those at the end of the program. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Marty Post. She's going to talk to us about Full House working from home with your family. I know that's something that we're all looking forward to learning a little bit more about, given the circumstances.
Thank you, Annie, and thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here today and share a little bit about how we can all adapt and thrive in this new reality. I'm Marty Bledsoe Post. I'm the founder of a company called Apparently, and also the author of the Playbook for Modern Moms. And my background is really in marketing. Essentially, I spent 20 years at marketing agencies while raising my family, and about 3 years ago was asked to stand up and tell the story of what that has been like for me and for them. And simply telling that story led to creating programs for working parents and working with employers to help their working parents, and ultimately putting out my book last year. And that is how Apparently was born. So this work has been going on for close to 3 years now. A majority of our clients are in the corporate sphere. We work with employee resource groups and HR teams to help bring programming to working parents inside organizations. We also do some parent coaching that can be done in small groups or one-on-one for people who don't have the support through their employer. When the schools were closed in Ohio, which was announced on Friday, March 13th of this year, Apparently immediately opened up a parent resource group on Facebook. It's a free group, and it's something that we have used throughout the whole entire spring and summer to stay in touch with a group of close to 200 parents, where we've been sharing stories, asking questions, giving tips and insights. So some of what I'm going to surface here this afternoon is drawn directly from that group. Parents who have tried these things, they have talked to us about what age and stage their kids are at and how it's gone, or they've talked to us about conversations with their employers and how those have gone. So I'm going to pull widely from their insights as I present some of these findings. Starting with the notion that being a parent in modern day America has drastically changed from what being a parent in America used to be like in prior generations. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, motherhood specifically, but really we can think broadly about parenthood in this context, has not always been the way that we see it today. In fact, in the pre-Victorian era, parenting was simply a biological fact. You either had children or you did not. The size of your family was not something that you consciously controlled, and the family was part of your survival network. They provided labor in an agrarian society. Younger children were looked after by older children and extended family, and parenting as we think of it did not even exist as an activity or as a verb in that time. When the world started to evolve throughout the Victorian era, the notion of being a good mother became idealized in the classic literature and art of the time, showing, depictions of the Madonna and Child. What's important to realize about all those depictions, though, is that those were upper class depictions of what motherhood was all about. And the ideal of femininity was assigned to this notion of being a good mother or a good woman. And those two things started to become linked in consciousness. It was less so for fathers, but still important when we think about what happened post-World War II in the Western world in terms of the way it shifted family dynamics. So this is related to a whole variety of causes, from the passage of the GI Bill, the creation of suburban neighborhoods, the fact that many of the returning soldiers got married, and the wives now were staying home with children, and parenting children up to the beginning of school became the primary realm of the mother herself. So up until that point, children had been raised by older siblings, extended networks, or hired help. And this is really the time in our own country where we see families starting to work in and on themselves to raise their kids up to the age of school with no additional layers of outside, either other generations or other partners to help make that possible. And again, a lot of that falling toward mom in that role. So this notion that we are responsible for raising our children physical, social, psychological, creative, educationally, all the way up to they leave us for school for the first time is a relatively modern idea in our culture. The other thing that's happened in the post-World War II Western culture as it relates to parenting is a move toward a more intensive style of parenting, meaning that more and more input on the part of the parent in terms of time, money, and resources into our children for a longer time into their lives. This is something that primarily exists in the Western world, but it is starting to spread across into Eastern cultures a little bit more. So not only is each family now solving for family challenges on their own without the benefit of a multi-generational group or a big community group around them, but the stakes are going up in terms of what is expected of today's parents. The way we live in our world has created some of this separateness. So not necessarily just thinking about how separated we have become since the pandemic began, but thinking about the fact that nearly half of grandparents live 5 or more hours away from their grandchildren. So families have been spread out across the generational divide more and more and more. And we start to see some changes in our children themselves. Now, I should soften that because it's probably not changes in the children. It's probably increased awareness and increased ability to diagnose and measure on the part of parents and pediatricians that gives us these types of statistics. But what we are now seeing is that 20% of school-age children are classified as neurologically diverse, meaning they do not learn in the mainstream way that the education system was designed due to things like this list on the right. They are extra gifted. Perhaps they have autism or Asperger's syndrome. Perhaps they have sensory processing challenges or have been diagnosed with ADD or ADHD. Perhaps they have dyslexia. Perhaps they're suffering from anxiety and depression, one or the other or both. Or they're classified as twice exceptional, which means 2 or more from the list above. All of these things existing in up to 20% of school-age children is a statistic from pre-COVID days. What we don't know yet is the true toll from an anxiety and depression standpoint on what school-age children are experiencing. What we do know is all of these things affect how children are able to learn. The other thing we know is that on average, a school calendar in the pre-COVID days used to include between 20 and 35 days out of school across the 180-day school year. So a parent who has 1, 2, or 3 weeks of vacation time doesn't even have enough time to take every single school holiday or school closure day off to be with their children, not to mention time for themselves to recharge and rejuvenate. So the school calendar itself, again, pre-COVID, a little bit out of sync with what modern day employers are able to provide in terms of time off. The takeaway of all of this is that families were isolated and overwhelmed before the pandemic began. Every single family was feeling the pressure of solving for all of these problems, being extra hyper busy, trying to pour so many resources into their kiddos, not having enough time to make it all happen. And then you introduce pandemic and lockdown into the American way of life. So these unprecedented times brought us some staggering statistics, with 95% of US school children out of school in March of this year for the remainder of the year, and more than half of our US workforce transitioned very quickly to a work from home model when they were not preparing for that in the months leading up to it. You also saw an increase in resources that we would typically rely on to help us when our kids are home and we are home, being closed due to the virus. So things like our libraries were closed, our playgrounds were closed. So lots of our outlets at the time in the spring were also closed. And it's not as if any of us can just pick up the phone and bring in a nanny anymore, not only for virus concerns, but because childcare in the home still remains one of the most expensive ways to have children looked after. So it really reduced the amount of options available to families. At the same time, what we did is we put an extraordinary amount of pressure on the place where we were doing what used to just be our living space suddenly became not only our office, but also our school. It also became our place of worship. It also became the place where we bought and sold and delivered goods or had things delivered to us. It potentially became a doctor's office or hospital if people were solving for more things at home without calling a provider due to concerns about going into a healthcare building during a pandemic. And my personal favorite, it became the seat of government, which means if you have more than one kid, you can relate to this idea that you are now solving disputes and acting in a sort of judicial manner when the whole family is home 24/7 in the same building together. Prior to the pandemic, people who left for the work world every morning could leave behind the world they were coming from. And what I mean by that is you could leave behind your parental identity. You could be a single parent, you could be a divorced co-parent or a separated co-parent, you could be a dual career family, you could be a couple with no kids. You could get your way into the work world, and those things were no longer part of how you were evaluated in the work world. What we saw beginning in a very sudden fashion in March was that our family background became front and center at work, especially if you were being put in a position to work from home and remotely dial in and be present in your career in a way when your family was in the same room with you. So no longer could those personal details remain behind the scenes, if you will. So what have we learned since March? I'm going to talk through 8 lessons for specifically how to manage this all at home. And then in a little while, we will get into some age-specific recommendations and some manager-specific recommendations. But these top 8 lessons really came from listening in on our parent resource groups that we've been facilitating, and also reading and following along with what parents are talking about in social media, and also what's being covered in the news media. So the number one thing that we heard quite a bit about was to carve out workspace. Now, in the springtime, when things were a bit more of a scramble, we saw a lot of families doing the best they could with this. What we see now in the fall is a lot more deliberate efforts to focus and give children a space to go when it is time to do schoolwork or e-learning, or however that's playing out in your particular district or household. Couple of things to think about with the workspace piece. One is if you are double duty parenting, meaning both parents are working from home, then those parents need to have a place to go away one at a time where there is a door. We had somebody in our group say they literally relocated their laundry room inside their home so that they could make that prior laundry space into an office with a door. We've had other people talk about how they've installed temporary doors across rooms to separate. So when possible, giving at least one parent that opportunity to go close the door. Single parents, however, need to keep one ear open at all times because there is not a partner to check in on the kiddos. And so we heard a lot of single parents talk about how they don't separate themselves away behind a door when they're trying to get their work done. And of course, the age of the child equates to their understanding of doors, because sometimes it's just a barrier for the child to bang on if they're trying really hard to get to their parent. Investing in headphones for the entire family is something that a lot of people have shared has been a real lifesaver, so that people are not hearing each other's Zoom calls, and also establishing something that we'll call time zones inside the home. And we'll talk in more detail about what time zones are, but time zones inside the home, meaning that somebody is on work duty and somebody's on parenting duty if you have the luxury of 2 parents working from home. Now, any opportunity to make this fun for younger kiddos has been welcomed. We've heard from parents in our groups explaining that if they put a nameplate on their child's desk, or they put a sticker or a sign above their child's workspace that sort of declared this is where so-and-so sits, that has been a powerful way to get especially young children bought into the notion. In every single one of these things that I'm going to talk about, I'm going to finish with an if it doesn't work. Because what I have heard and understand in my own experience is that a lot of these ideas can sound really good. Some are going to work great in your family, and others are just going to be, a total no-go. If carving out workspaces ends up not working, one of the things that we heard people talk about is making sure that as the parent, your essentials are ready to pick up and move. Meaning that you can grab your laptop and your headphones and your notebook. Those things are always located together, and you can move to another location if that's what has to work out, because you maybe get a kiddo who gets right into a zone on an assignment at the dining room table, and that's where you were going to take your call. So being flexible and knowing that as the adult, you are probably the more adaptable of the age groups at play in your house. Now, the second thing is dress the part. There have been a lot of funny memes about this around the internet and social media. However, what we know from brain science is that this is literally a way to signal to our brain that we're switching from the home self to the work self. And doing it first thing in the morning can help prevent that embarrassing 11 a.m. call when you realize, oh my gosh, I still have, bedhead, or still look like I'm, just starting my day. One of the things we heard from a team actually is trying to make it fun for everyone to see how long they take to notice crazy earrings or new scarf or hat, or putting things behind you in your home environment in interesting configurations, whatever it takes to kind of switch your brain over to now I'm going on. This one, if it doesn't work, no one can see your yoga pants, like our friend over here in the picture. I've also seen some really funny first day of school photos of kiddos with a shirt and pajama pants on. So if it's something that works for the kiddos to stay a little more comfortable, or has worked for you to stay more comfortable, that can be helpful too. I will say we've had a lot of people tell us that when they get up and get dressed and put on, makeup, jewelry, whatever, it really does help them make a mental transition. And that's one of the things that we have to understand, is that we're all having to now make those on our own, because our environment no longer cues us for those transitions. And this brings us over to the zone schedule. So this is an example of a schedule that we started working through early on to show families how they could really chunk out the day. Because again, the way we used to organize our day has completely changed. So one parent, this is for dual parent families where both parents are working from home. One parent takes on the time zone as I'm the kid captain for right now. And you break up the day in terms of these zones: early AM, mid AM, lunch, early PM, mid PM, dinner, and evening. And you think about who's going to be the kid captain. You think about how to include the kids in this a little bit to make it more interactive and fun. With little kids, you can take this to a point of sort of signaling, dad's the kid captain right now, or mom's the kid captain right now, with a cape or a hat or a badge, or somebody that basically signals I'm on duty for you right now. The really important thing on this particular idea is whoever is the kid captain for, let's just say, early AM, which covers getting up, dressed, fed, that parent does all of that, all the way through to, fixing breakfast, serving breakfast, cleaning up breakfast, resetting kitchen, because the next parent to tag in then for mid-morning is going to need to get everything out for snack. And so we see in some of the recent literature about couples and how they communicate about unpaid labor in the home, that it can be really beneficial if the person owns their full activity and not just the planning or just the execution. So the idea with this zone schedule is to take full ownership of the kid stuff during your zone. This next idea starts to come into some of the brain science that we know about habit formation. So as you might recall, when all of this began, there was a sense that this will be, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. And there were a lot of memes running around about, well, in 3 weeks, I can become a new person. I can start a workout habit. I can start a dinner habit. I can start, because it's the perfect amount of time to start a habit. This was before we realized this would be a new way of life. But what we know about the science of training our brain to create new habits, especially as adults, is that we have to trigger and reward the behavior. We can't just do the behavior. So if we play this out as an example, finding a trigger that tells your brain it's time to get back to work. This is really helpful when we have to constantly context switch during the day, which means I have to go over here and help my first grader get on a Zoom call, and then I have to come back over here and try to get back into my work. So this can be something very simple. It can be a small chime that I play. It can be a candle that I light that, is like, okay, now I'm back in the office. It can be something like a song. I mean, there's really no set structure to what the trigger needs to be, but if you use it repeatedly at the beginning of your work time, your focus time, and then reward yourself at the end of your focused work time with something, could be tiny, could be an M&M, it could be the whole bag of M&Ms, it could be a walk, it could be, a quick little dance break. It's important not to give up on this one because, like I said at the beginning, there, it does take some time to establish a new habit. But what we know from the training and development world with adults is that this is a good way to start to smooth out a habit, is to trigger, do the behavior, and then reward yourself for that behavior. The other thing is to really do your best to manage your attention. So there was a lot of talk in the professional world for years about how to manage your time. And that has really shifted now because what we have to manage as our most precious resources impact our attention. So it's okay to sit down with yourself and spend a few minutes thinking about, well, what are my worst non-child distractions? I mean, what are the things that really drive me, up a wall trying to sit down here and focus in my dining room, in my office, in my bedroom? Is it the laundry? Is it the desire to go tidy things up? Is it something on TV, or is it social media? Really think about what that is, and then try to start to structure your mind in terms of how you're going to let that in during the day or not. Digitally, we are disrupted about every 3 minutes at work, and that's when we were at work. So we know that we are interrupted more than that probably in this new scenario. So you can definitely tune out some of these distractions from a digital standpoint. You can turn on do not disturb on your computer. You can turn off the sound on your texts. You can not listen in on every little, or not swipe every little notification that comes up on your phone. Put your phone in a drawer. Those tricks also are very helpful. You can also make it fun and rack up points among you and your family members for not doing chores during the day. I think kids actually find this one really funny because they're normally rewarded for doing chores. So you can actually have a point system where if you make it all the way through to the end of the work and school day and you haven't stopped to fold that annoying basket of laundry, you get 5 points. And then you still have to fold it. And maybe that's worth more. The other thing that we have heard people talk about is, if I just absolutely can't concentrate because I have to get that done because it's driving me crazy, set a timer, get it done, and move back over to the workday and do your trigger behavior reward pattern again. Keep it human. We heard from a lot of people in especially the early part of the spring suffering from feeling really disconnected from their coworkers and feeling like a lot of Zoom fatigue, a lot of conference call fatigue. So remembering that one interaction can go a really long way. We are social creatures at work. We need to see and hear our teams at times. So emphasizing with your team that perhaps it's a good idea to have cameras on. Maybe we should talk on the phone. Kids and pets in the background hopefully are now expected and an enjoyed part of the day. We'll talk more about what that feels like to be the parent sitting there when the child runs through the background of the call. Ways to make this fun. We had a lot of employers say that they've been thinking about ways to add to this. So virtual happy hours, virtual spirit day, you saw Annie's virtual background. Those kinds of things can help bring the human connection back across the team. If this really just doesn't work for you, you can invest in a little tiny camera slider that goes on your computer if you feel like, hey, I just can't be on all the time. These little camera sliders, I have one, they just close really quickly. So you're able to very smoothly and quickly get rid of the view into your home if you need to, if a child comes in the room or something like that. One thing to remember too, in terms of Keep It Human, is that everybody on your team is likely reaching a struggle point right now. What I am seeing very clearly among my clients and what I'm hearing is that we've kind of hit our limit of being able to rebound against this challenge. And a lot of people are especially feeling the stress. So keeping it human could be simply, saying to everyone, why don't we skip this week's call? Why don't we do this one over email? Why don't we understand the fatigue people are under here, and maybe make a different plan and acknowledge the level of stress that people are experiencing. This last one is about, this is actually a new one we've added to the Thinking as School has re-begun for many people now. And this is all about how you use your calendar. So if you have one of those jobs where everybody's using shared calendaring, here are some things that we have seen parents say have been really helpful. From the work side of this, use your calendar to block time to check in with your kids and update it regularly. So you really should have, if you have a packed calendar, that's a problem because you're going to need to check in on kids who are doing e-learning at home. So at the beginning of the day, you can do this a couple of different ways. You can look across the day and say, okay, there's a 30-minute slot and there's a 30-minute slot. Those are being blocked right now for kid check-ins. Or you can say, the top 10 minutes of every other hour are going to be kid check-ins, and just block off those little slivers. However it works best for you to start to send the message to your manager and your team that yes, you are working a second job. And yes, you will have to check in at that second job throughout the day. Also, we've heard examples of employers offering meeting-free mornings or meeting-free Mondays so that they can acknowledge like, hey, we know you're starting the day with the kids, so we won't do any meetings before, let's say, 10 a.m. Or we know you're starting the week with the kids, so we won't have any meetings on Mondays. Or we'll just do a later start time as an office because we know everybody's got to get kids settled and started in their e-learning day. So there's lots of creativity about how teams and companies can handle the time in the calendar. The next piece of this, though, is how do you help your kids handle this piece? So the truth of the matter is that in a classroom with 25 kids and one teacher, if a child gets stuck, that teacher cannot run over to each child who is stuck on each idea every single time they're stuck. And one of the things they need to learn as they're growing up through elementary and middle school is how to plan their work around the check-in from the teacher or the feedback from the teacher, just like teams have to learn to work around the feedback point from a manager, right? So you can help the kids understand when you're coming back to be part of their day. For older kids, it can simply be like, hey, I've got an e-learning break booked for myself at 10:30. I'll be checking in on you guys then. For younger kids, it could be a little sticker, or it could be a little clock face, or it could be some way to kind of indicate to them or set a timer so they know, this is the time when mom or dad is coming back. You also can encourage them with an age-appropriate list of what to do when they're stuck. So I've heard a lot of stories of frustration in the past 2 weeks from parents who are saying that they're over here trying to finish a work call and their children are over here not getting anything done because they're stuck. And I think this is something that the children probably wouldn't be doing that same level of stuckness at school. They're doing it because you are their parent. It could be a couple things. It could be truly technically stuck. We've had a lot of stories of apps having to be deleted and reinstalled, Wi-Fi going down. The main platform that's running our children's e-learning actually went offline the first day. I mean, truly tech challenges. There's some things that are stuck. But then there are also some things that are like, oh, this is new. I've never done this before. I want mom to come over here and tell me what this assignment is or help me navigate this. So you can always check with your child's teacher depending on their age to really understand what is it that you counsel them to do when they're stuck. But honestly, if you could give them ideas of 1 or 2 things they could do on something that maybe they've done before or they already understand, or move on to a different subject, that will help them not be sitting waiting while you're trying to be over here, finishing that work call or dealing with your manager or what have you. That coding system for technology needs versus learning needs is something that we've seen. So you could have a card a color-coded card system. If your kid brings you a red card, that means the whole thing crashed, the iPad, it's offline, the iPad, the computer, whatever, I can't do anything. Versus if they bring you a yellow card or orange card is more like, I don't understand. And then you can use that to decide, like that red card waves in your face and you say to everybody on your call, I'm going to have to go, versus it's a yellow card and you say, I'll be there in 10 minutes. So again, this is part of teaching some skill to kiddos about how they can participate in getting the help they need and some triaging. And number 8 is do your best and let go of the rest. We have had the opportunity in all of our conversations with parents and educators and employers to talk a little bit about grace and forgiveness and being kind and human right now. So one of the things that we've heard a lot of people say is that we have to just let go of the idea that right now this is going to go smoothly or perfectly. And we have to just give it our best and hope that we can expect everyone to believe the same of us, that we are giving it our best at this time. One thing to consider is about you personally, and that is that while you have left behind the place, the system, the structure, and the culture of the way you used to go to work, you are still working from home, with a whole lot of you. And so this has to do a little bit with understanding yourself, because even though you're working from home with your family, that still includes working from home with all of your personality and tendencies and needs and reactions and things like that. So one of the things that we have talked quite a bit about is finding yourself an hour to really rethink and go back over what you might know about yourself from any kind of prior personality profiling or testing that you might have done either through your employer, such as the DISC personalities or the Myers-Briggs, or even on a personal side through something like the 5 love languages and how you might have evaluated yourself in terms of the way you are in your family. And the reason we bring this up is that now you find yourself operating as your work self, which is probably where you would have encountered something like the Myers-Briggs or the DISC profile, but also operating with your family, which is where a lot of this idea of what's your love language, how do you need to be appreciated, how do you need to be motivated, is kind of existing simultaneously. And the more these tools can help us have a conversation about what we need, then the better off we're going to be as a functioning team inside the house. So getting used to the idea and starting to get your kids used to the idea of saying things like, what really motivates me to do a great job is verbal praise, and encouraging them to think about, well, what motivates them to do a great job? Or something that really fills my bucket as I'm trying to navigate these difficult days is, little sticky notes that you kids bring to my desk, like that really fills me up, or whatever that might be. What you are trying to do, as with any of these personality tools, is to bring the unconscious into the conscious world. And that is something that kids are not too young to learn to apply. The same goes for teaching them about growth mindset. And, I'm not good at this yet. This is hard for me. This is new. We're going to learn this together. Those kinds of phrases and tools will help them understand that this is not something that has to be perfect today. This is something we're going to go on a journey together to manage. So we bring this one up because the more you know, the better prepared you might be to have some of those conversations. And frankly, the better prepared you might be to manage your own self, knowing how you operate under stress, knowing what ideal conditions you need, trying to think about how you can get anywhere close to those ideal conditions can be helpful and food for conversation. From an age-specific standpoint, obviously, if you've got a little child versus a teenager, versus a college student at home, things are going to be very different. So what we're going to do next is break down some of the things that we have been hearing. From a baby postpartum standpoint, the mom is the top priority because mom is in recovery mode. We don't have a great system of postpartum support here in the United States. In fact, there was a story about the California Assemblywoman Buffy Wicks this week, who was forced to drive an hour to be part of a late night vote on the floor. She was not allowed to vote by proxy, despite the fact that she has a 1-month-old daughter, and had to bring her daughter with her to the floor of the California Assembly. They did apologize to her the next day. But it is really, really important to realize if you've got a team member or a neighbor or a family member who is coming through this delicate postpartum time, that extra support may be required above and beyond work hours. That could mean that, the team chips in for gift cards for meals for a family with a new baby. Remember that isolation may be particularly scary and painful for these parents if they especially are having their first baby, if they are, experiencing their first time with parental leave, their first time, and not being able to get the normal level of support that they would get if we weren't in the middle of a contagious virus pandemic. So checking in often. If this is an employee in this situation, making sure that if HR is not checking in, you as the team lead potentially are checking in, or teammate are checking in. If it's a family member, seeing what level of support you can provide from afar, because the people who are in this life stage of parenting are in a particularly tender time. From a toddler standpoint, one of the things we saw right away in the spring was fascinating, was, toddlers who are in a daycare scenario and were immediately pulled from seeing their friends. You might think, well, they're just toddlers, it's just daycare. But what we saw is that they were really excited to have time with their friends over virtual connections, to see on the screen the faces of the kids in their classrooms, to see on the screen the faces of their teachers. So your children can, even at a toddler age, interact with other people through a screen. It's not the same, of course, as being in the same room, but it is really still key for them, and it is a way for them to keep connecting. Of course, if you have a toddler, you're probably painfully aware of how long the day can seem. And so breaking it up into small pieces, much more the way that you would if you were in a preschool or daycare setting, and remembering that if, an 18 to 20-minute activity is about what you're going to get for the toddler age, and starting to rethink, an hour-long meeting, if you've got a toddler, is probably not going to work unless you've got 4 activities ready and you've let your team know that you might have to jump off for an accident or a tantrum or something like that. Tire them outside early and often if you can. Have a safe zone. This is something that parents shared has been helpful. Like, it's like the play space where the toddler can be plopped right in there and know that they're not going to, eat something or fall or whatever when there's a really important need to focus on the screen. And the last one is to really rebuild your neighborhood, your village, if you will, in your neighborhood. So as some of the restrictions have eased a bit, people are telling us about how they've been teaming up to say, like, I'll take the boys to the park today. Can you take them tomorrow? Can you take them Friday? And availing yourself of that if you've got other families on the block with young kids or toddlers who can even buy you 15, 20 minutes to focus, or to close your eyes and rest, or to reset your day, or get something to eat. So allowing that help to form around you if it's possible. Oops, I went too fast. Preschool, Zoom or calls for story time with families or known babysitters or friends. So preschoolers will sit and look, and again, interact through a screen. We've seen lots of examples of it. So maybe grandma can call and read them a story over FaceTime. Maybe they can do an art idea that they're watching on a video, or interacting with other kids, or a trusted babysitter could call them. Hyper organize and minimize toys and activities. You may have noticed if you've been in a preschool or daycare classroom, they don't have a lot of different things available to play with. They have a very set level of options in front of the kids, which makes it much easier for the kids to dive in and pick something. So I'm sure you really don't want to think right now about cleaning the playroom, but it might really help the children engage better when they come into the playroom in the morning. So the other phrase that I personally have used incredibly effectively with my own little ones is this phrase, I'm going to have you blank. And I picked this up from my son's preschool teachers, and it's actually incredibly, incredibly effective at getting a kid to do something. I don't even mean something they don't want to do. I just mean something in general. So the way this works is, I'm going to have you wash your hands before you come to the table. I'm going to have you sit over there and do Legos while I do this call. I'm going to have you look at books for the next, until the timer goes off. It doesn't offer any option to argue, because it's also not a please sit and look at Legos, please sit and look at books, please wash your hands. Where I find, at least in my family, those kinds of direct commands get a lot of resistance, but I'm going to have you blank is something magical that the teachers taught me that I have used over and over and over again. The other thing with preschoolers is to really understand you've got to allow feelings out. This is true for all age kids, but this is where it starts to get key and it blends over into the older years as well. So in our own family, we do a morning meeting where we look at the whiteboard of what's coming up for the day, and we have to draw a color monster of how we're feeling as we begin the morning. And any age child can draw a color monster. They are able to understand and communicate, I'm feeling blue, green, red, orange, whatever that might be. The point here is that will calm them, that will give them an outlet before you're trying to start setting them toward an activity. Okay, next we're going to talk quickly through the school ages, but I will take these one at a time. So for an elementary standpoint, of course, e-learning is only part of the day. I've heard from parents these last 2 weeks who are like, oh yeah, so the e-learning's like 2 hours and then I've still got 6 hours of work and they don't. So thinking through that a little bit, if you have any control over when and how they interact with their e-learning, and if it makes sense for them to do that when you are on a call or when you aren't on a call, whatever works best for your family scenario is important to think about. But here's the other thing. Anyone can be their teacher. So their e-learning day that's officially sanctioned by or taught by their teachers is part of it, yes. But you could also invite family members or friends or colleagues to sign up in advance and say, every day at 2 o'clock, my kids are going to be waiting on Zoom and anyone can call in and teach them something. This is something from one of the mothers in our groups who said she basically made a Calendly and people could come in and sign up to teach her kids anything for 1 hour on Zoom. And she had people teaching her kids who live in Ohio how to ride the New York City subway system. She had people teaching them about photosynthesis. She had people teaching them about how to buy things online. So she had all these different topics that people picked, but really they are able to sustain attention and have presentations, if you will, by other people. So if you're desperate to fill additional time, maybe rethink, who or how you could pull other folks into their learning world to run an extra call or activity with them. The other thing is to get them on a cadence of writing and sending letters, cards, and art to other people. That could be from a volunteer standpoint, sending them to a senior center or to members of a community, or it could even be family, something like that. And then last but not least, elementary school kiddos love to be the teacher themselves or the babysitter themselves. So they are prime candidates for teaching littler ones, reading to littler ones, or even taking advantage of a virtual babysitting offering through something like a company or a co-working space or something like that, where they can interact online and be kept busy. Middle school and high school, these are different. These kiddos are much more self-sufficient when it comes to their learning agenda and learning day. And so it's less about, how do you jump over there and help them solve their math problem, and much more about how do you help them connect with friends. So staying connected on Messenger and social media, or conference calls, Zoom calls with friends are great for middle schoolers. Of course, the social media piece carries some challenges for certain kids, and so you have to keep an eye on that. But here's the best part. These kids can actually start to serve as the virtual babysitters. So if you have a middle schooler with an extra hour on his or her hands, who could they call and read a story to over Zoom? How could they contribute into a household that has younger kids? Or could they take the toddlers of the street around the block on a quick little nature walk or something like that? Is there a way for them to get tapped? And the other thing is to involve them in potentially, themes or creative arts around how are you adapting. So if you have a family tradition of, camping over Labor Day and you're not able to go this year, can you tap your middle schoolers to say, well, what are all the things we would normally be doing at the campground and how could we adapt those and do those at home? They love to get involved in these sort of creative activities of setting up themes and setting up plans, because they're getting into an age where they're starting to have more control over that. High school, and the moms we talked to specifically, and dads actually this morning, we had a great interview with a dad who's got a high schooler and a college student. This idea in high school and college is you're really yes, I mean, you're in today, right? Like this is important what's happening right now, but you sort of get in this stage where you're like, everything's about the next year. Everything's about, well, how is this going to impact, senior year or freshman year of college? And so thinking about ways they can get involved in service opportunities, letting them serve as virtual babysitters, or even recruiting them as interns. If you have things that you're just not getting to for your work role and you need some clerical help, they are a great place to start in terms of offering their assistance. So all of these things around us right now create a sense of this is far from business as usual. However, there are a few ways that thinking about business as usual can actually help us. We follow and are in touch with a great influencer called HR Mom. She's on Facebook at HR Mom. She's really worth following. And she recommended early on this notion of having these daily postmortem meetings with your family. So again, borrowing a page from the work playbook and bringing it home, checking in, how are you feeling physically and emotionally? Encouraging kiddos to get in touch, or even your spouse, your co-parent, how are you feeling? What went well today and what didn't? So inviting some of that reflection. What do you need from me to make today or tomorrow go better? These kinds of conversations can be really, really revealing. And then always, what fun things should we make sure to do that is not school or work or e-learning related today or this week? What's interesting about this is not a typical behavior for most families to sit down and say like, well, what went well yesterday and what didn't, but it's a key tool from effective teamwork and effective communication that when applied to your family, who's basically now functioning like a work team, can be really, really helpful. Another thing is to sit down with your partner or with yourself. If you're doing this on your own, take a deep breath and think about what makes this hard in our family. And then only solve for the top challenge on that list. So there might be 3 or 4 things. In our particular home, what makes a lot of this challenging is the ages of my kids, who are 6th grade and 1st grade. They're in a high conflict stage in their relationship. So the conflict between the siblings is what has made some of my days particularly challenging. So then I need to sit down and figure out, well, how can I solve for or improve the sibling conflict that's going on? Can I reward them for not getting in conflict? Can I, set a consequence for if their conflict interrupts work, then what happens? So what I'm inviting here is a little bit of reflection time to say, okay, rather than just lump it all into this is so hard, which is very tempting to do. And I know it's really hard. And hopefully you have friends and a support network where you can vent at that sort of like emotional level. But I'm talking really strategically thinking about, well, what's making it hardest? Is it that the Wi-Fi keeps crashing? Is it time to get a new modem? I mean, can you take the top thing that's making it challenging and find a way to address that so that things can start to improve? If you have older kids or you have a co-parent, these weekly strategy sessions can be really helpful as well. This is somewhat like the postmortem conversation from HR Mom, although that was meant to be more of like a dinner table, breakfast table thing, and this is meant to be more of a meeting. But really looking back on, let's just say last week, what went well. And I want to break that down into 2 categories because I think that's really important. So what went well because it got good results? Meaning we got praised, we met the deadline, the result was good. And what went well because it gave us comfort. And right now, in times of high stress, anxiety, uncertainty, even fear, it is okay that something went really well simply because it gave you a sense of comfort or gave the kiddos a sense of comfort. So categorizing what went well with a little bit more depth can potentially help you. And maybe there's nothing in the gave us comfort column, and maybe you need to prioritize some things. It could be really little things. It could be, fresh flowers, cup of tea, weighted blanket. Those kinds of things can bring some comfort into an environment that's really, really still operating from a high stress level. And the exact same thing applies when you're thinking about what did not go well. So in this context, there's 2 levels of what did not go well. One is it had a real consequence. So, or it made us really uncomfortable. So this is where I talk about the parent sitting here doing this, Zoom conversation, and a child runs through, without their diaper. Or a child comes in screaming, the Wi-Fi went down and I need help. And they're not paying attention to you being on a call. They're not politely saying, excuse me, or knocking or showing you a color-coded card. They're like freaking out. If that has a real consequence for your career, if your boss calls you later offline and says, look, you can't work for our company anymore because your child interrupted our call, that's a real consequence for that. If it just made you a little uncomfortable, then you go back into the what gave us comfort column and you pick something that you needed or need. So if having the kids interrupt is like just so embarrassing for you, then maybe you need a cup of, chamomile tea to get through those calls, because you just know it's going to happen and it makes you really uncomfortable. And you need a little comfort trick to help you out with that, versus if something had real consequences. So I think it's important to kind of untangle those a little bit so that we aren't just developing in our brain a rut of like, well, conference calls don't go well. Okay, well, let's talk about that and let's break that down. So weekly, looking at this from a past standpoint. Also, what are you letting go of every single week? We've asked this in all of our parent interviews, and we continue to talk about it in the group about what can I just, stop worrying about? And then what do I need and from whom? So this is actually a little bit getting into some of that personality profiling. Maybe you need more help from your spouse. Maybe you need more compliments from the kids. Maybe you need more manners from the kids. Maybe you need more time outside. But going into the week proactively thinking, okay, like, what do I need this week? Setting a word or a theme for the week. We maybe are in the habit of doing this annually. It's New Year's and my word for the year is truth. Actually is my word for 2020. But what about the week? Is the word for the week, breathe? Is it focus? Is it let go? It's two. Can you kind of do this either for yourself or as a group? Also, it's helpful if you can look out a whole week and say, we have some code red moments for each parent or each student this week. Now, in my own personal scenario, I would call what I'm doing right now with this session, this is code red for me. This means that I get this time to focus. It's quiet, except maybe you heard the dog barking. That one I'm not quite able to control yet. But this is key. Everybody, Friday afternoon, mommy's got a code red, right? Or daddy's got a Monday morning meeting that's always code red. So we use that time to go for our walk. Bringing a little bit of attention and intention to this and mapping this out ahead of time can help. Same thing if you've got kids with testing coming up, quizzes coming up. Our daughter is now learning to play an instrument on Zoom. So she's sitting in her bedroom doing orchestra practice. That's a code red moment. We do not have the TV on during that time. We try to keep the house quiet. And it's important to kind of acknowledge those ahead of time for each other. And then if you are enacting the time zone schedule, letting the kids know who's in charge of which time zone of the day. I understand that this is asking an awful lot of our working parents to start to think this way, but if you have little kids, this is probably the only way to free up one parent to get a little bit of work done. Now, along the timeline of family structure in our country changing, employee and employer relations have changed as well. So we're going to spend a light little amount of time on this, but from a high level standpoint, the workforce has become more distributed than ever. Even prior to COVID, we see more and more globalization of specifically white collar roles, but even more in blue collar roles as well. And you might be asked to work with somebody across a time zone or a country that is not the same as yours. Teams have become more matrixed inside organizations. This is actually data from Gallup that shows that, Gartner, that shows that matrixed organizations are becoming more prevalent across all industries, meaning you are more likely now to have a direct manager and perhaps an indirect craft overseer or supervisor as well. And what that relates to or amounts to is that every decision that used to be, oh, that picture is very upset, isn't it? What that says is that it takes more people to make decisions than it ever used to. So because we've got a more distributed workforce that's more matrix, it's now more consensus based, and something that you maybe used to just decide and do has to be rethought. And we are all, as professionals in every single industry, inundated with digital information overload. So we receive upwards of 150 emails a day. There is information coming at us now from, text, email, phone, IM, conference calls, our calendars dinging, there's just a lot. And that has not made us work any more efficiently. In fact, American workers now work 11% more hours than we did in 1979, which if you break that down across a week, that amounts to something like 40 minutes more a day. And that is really, really hard to stomach for workers who were already kind of up to here. Many Americans have said that their work bleeds over into the weekends at least once a month. And so it's time to rethink how we are approaching teams. The recommendation that I am suggesting from what I'm hearing from clients is to rethink this notion of, there's no I in team and we're all in this together, to actually, you need to get very specific about every single I in your team, and that's all I's. Every single individual employee on your team is someone that you need to jump in and pay attention to. I'm going to walk through these now. One of the things that we heard is that it's easy to get this notion that we've been doing this for so long, certainly the team must be settled in by now. That's actually not ever going to happen. And that's something that's a little bit hard for us as leaders and managers to kind of wrap our head around. But we're not ever going to get to a stasis in this reality. In fact, the level of consternation that we heard from working parents when we found out school was not going to resume full time in the building was pretty high. And the reason is that this is not something where we just stick with it and everybody gets sort of into their groove. So resist the idea that your team is settled in or getting the hang of it. And remember to actively continue to find out who are the people in the team who are struggling, what are they struggling with, and how can you help? If you are managing a team, focus on managing that team as a group of people. Remember, all eyes in team now, all these individuals, and don't manage the tasks and don't manage the time as much as possible. In fact, earlier this week, I was on an excellent call with a bunch of employers brainstorming solutions, and one woman shared that their HR team has completely shifted their training focus from training managers in technical skill to training them to be social workers. So let that sink in for a second. Because they're training on emotional intelligence. They're training on how to provide psychological support. They're training on how to refer employees to mental health benefits, wellness benefits, additional things that the company can provide. They're basically training their managers to start to become the interveners on behalf of the employees and say, hey, are you okay? And that's what managing the team versus the tasks or the time means. Of course, you're responsible for outcomes, but more than that, you are responsible for the people on your team and how they're doing. And if they have aging parents they're caring for, or aging grandparents they're caring for, or if they have someone in their family who's been sick, or if they have little kids at home, they're probably really struggling. So think about your people skills. What the woman who was sharing this idea said, we used to call these soft skills, and now we just said, hey, all of our frontline managers are social workers for the time being, because we are managing our people, and that's what we need to do. Carefully plan when you need to be in sync. So this is, as a leader, reduce the amount of synchronous working time you need. Meaning, get more comfortable with asynchronous working. And if you need an analogy for this, I have found it very helpful to think about this in terms of texting versus emailing. Emailing is ideally asynchronous communication. I sit down and write the email when I have time and mental clarity to do so, and I send it to you. And you, when you have time and mental clarity to take it in, will read the email, and then you will respond again when you have time and mental clarity to do so. Versus texting, where I'm like, hey, we got to chat right now. Like, this is happening right now. I need to know, are you calling in right now? That's synchronous. Try to think about your work projects more and more that way, because parents do not have a ton of time to give to synchronous communication throughout the workday if it's something that can be asynchronous. You've probably heard that funny meme around professional circles of another meeting that could have been an email, right? This is the time to put it in an email and not call a meeting. And don't call meetings on short notice, because the team getting in sync is really, really hard, especially for parents. So can you move toward thinking of the team as a more distributed model where they all have asynchronous working time. Even if they're still marching toward the same goal, they don't all have to be on the same Zoom call at the same time to make that happen. Another thing for managers is to, wherever possible, revisit expectations. So what I'm literally talking about here is revisiting the deadlines, revisiting the amount and fidelity of work at times. Are there times that a lower fidelity deliverable could suffice? This is the time to allow that to be okay. You can also experiment with revisiting expectations on, like I said earlier, what time do we start in the morning? How many meetings do we have? You could even set new expectations about, listen, everybody, new rule, you don't put meetings on calendars on the same day. If it wasn't there at 5 o'clock the night before, the meeting cannot happen, because nobody can wake up in the morning and have all this new meeting stuff hit their calendar if they're also trying to get a first grader through a math lesson. Reassigning resources and benefits. So this is actually a multifaceted idea, but if your company has access to make a change in or add a benefit right now, there are all kinds of ways that you can add wellness benefits for your employees. So you can add additional resources behind your EAP. You can make mental health calls and resources available at lower cost or no cost through an employee assistance program, EAP, or something similar. You can form an employee resource group for parents of school-aged kids so that they now have somebody to talk to and debrief with every other week or something like that. Reassigning resources has to do with, if you have office space and you know that parents are struggling to get all this done at the dining room table, can you make it possible for the parent to come in with their school-age children, and the school-age children uses a desk and the parent uses a desk, and they stay 6 feet away and they meet the protocols, but they're able to be in there together? Can you even go so far as to say, hey, our company will pay to have a real life tutor in here in the cafeteria Monday to Friday. Bring your kids, set them up with their calls, and the tutor will be here to answer their questions while mom and dad do what needs to be done. These are not really that outrageous of ideas when you stop and think about what's at stake here, which is maintaining your workforce and helping them come through this together as continuing to be part of your team. If you're in a leadership position, I cannot emphasize enough how important it is that this starts at the top. You must acknowledge your own family, your own struggles, etc. If you have a little one running around without their diaper on and you're the head of the team, please let that be seen. If you are a C-level executive who has to take a call in a hallway because your children all need the different workspaces in the house at that exact moment, please tell the team, I'm in the hallway because I can't find a solid surface to sit down because I got one doing school and one doing band and one doing, virtual soccer or whatever it is. This is a real anecdote from a C-level executive taking a call in the hallway and saying, this is the only quiet spot I can find, you guys. I hope it sounds okay. You have to start to show some of that. And as an executive, you also have to really think about how you're showing, this is when I'm on and this is when I'm off, because we're all struggling right now to create those lines. Net, if you're running, if you're in any kind of leadership role, please take care of your people. Back in May, the data came out in this study that said only 2 in 5 employees working at home have had a manager check in on their well-being. That's a tough statistic. It needs to be a much higher level of checking in on truly asking about well-being. And remember, what they will tell you about what's on their mind is the tip of the iceberg versus what they're really dealing with and worrying about. So to the extent that you can make it safe in one-on-one conversations or anonymous feedback loops, or however that works best in your culture, to the extent that you can make it safe for people to really share what they're struggling with, the better off everybody's going to be, because you can start to collectively solve for it. I'm a huge proponent in all of my workshops, all of my coaching, all of my programs of radical self-care. And it's so against the grain right now for people to stop and take a moment and do something for themselves because the pressure on them is so high. But this is the time when it's absolutely beyond essential that you take care of yourself. So do this for yourself, encourage the people on your team to do this, and make sure this is happening inside your family. Why? Well, they tell you that thing on the airplane about put your own oxygen mask on before you assist somebody else. What they don't tell you is that you actually have about 15-second window to get that done, to get your mask on before you're passed out from lack of oxygen, and then you're no help to anybody. So when I say radical self-care, what I am talking about is doubling down on whatever it is that gives you a little bit of comfort and peace to get through the next 5 minutes or the next call or the next hour or the next workday, and prioritizing that to the top of the agenda, the top of the day, because you really only have a little bit of time to get yourself shored up to get ready to do what is required of you. So it can look like a million things, big to small, but make sure you're taking a little bit of time for care. Also, do not underestimate the power of paid time off. So this was a huge part of our employer discussion this week about people being afraid to take PTO right now. And it's a multifaceted issue because vacations are kind of off the table. So who's going to take PTO? But this is the time to take it. Mental health days. If you're a leader and you say, I'm taking a day today, guys, because I just need a mental health day, that sends a powerful message to your team. The Wall Street Journal actually ran a story with the headline, "No, really, your boss wants you to take vacation now." And the quote that I loved was, "We don't want people saving their vacation time for a moment that won't come." Your company wants you to go ahead and take your PTO. If you are in a position in your company to have any influence on this, you should encourage the company to make PTO available in 1 to 2 hour increments. So I've often seen it's a day or it's a half day, but it really needs to be maybe an hour. I mean, maybe to get my kids through e-learning, I need 90 minutes of PTO every single day to know that I'm over there managing and my team knows I'm not available and my calendar is marked out and I'm not feeling bad because this is my paid time off that I'm taking, that I've earned. But more so than that, to take a full out break, take a long weekend, take a week off. Another excellent article last week in the Harvard Business Review about resilience is actually based much more on how you recharge than how long you can endure. So we perhaps have gotten and given the wrong idea in Western culture that our resilience is measured by how long we can just keep fighting it out. And that's actually not true. The most resilient workers, parents, children are those who are well rested, those who take the time to engage in a little bit of self-care, those who take the time to modulate their emotions and needs, and those who really recharge and then go back into, and don't underestimate the power of doing this during the workday. Taking a walk at lunch so you can get through the afternoon is a really, really better way to use that lunch than like hunkering down and trying to eat at your desk and power through. Important research here. A couple of other resources available through Apparently. My book, Retrofit, the Playbook for Modern Moms, is online at retrofitbook.com. And I also have an e-guide available at apparently.com for helping parents go forward to work. And the guide is written for families and managers alike. Thank you very much, everybody, for all of your time and attention. And Annie, I'm ready and excited to hear any questions that anybody might have at the end of this presentation.
Absolutely. We have a comment and a question. This has been a great presentation. Is it possible to get the slides to re-review and steal some of the ideas?
I have a handout version of the slides. It's about 8 slides, kind of condensing the tips and some of the strategies and things that I'll be happy to send as a follow-up. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. See if we've got any more. Yeah, these were great tips. We really appreciate the opportunity to learn from you and break it down, make it more manageable. Will those slides have the websites that you just shared, or can we type those into the chat?
Oh, yeah. I'll put them in there.
Okay.
As part of the resources. Absolutely.
Fantastic. I know we had the first week of school here this week, so I think everybody's looking to figure out what works and what doesn't work for their own families.
Yeah. Yeah, and what I really do appreciate and understand is that you can set great intentions and it can all just completely fall apart. And so that's where that grace and hopefully humor comes in. And I also think a lot of that has to do with the culture of the company you're working remotely for. If they have a culture where people are treated with respect and appreciated, that's probably going to be a lot easier than something that's sort of formal.
Definitely.
What I really do hope is that the changes of COVID-19 have pointed out the unsustainable way that families were getting through the work week before this, and that we can create some new solutions. I keep thinking about, it's like somebody took our perfectly designed Lego village and broke all the bricks apart and threw them up in the air, and they all landed back on the table, and now we get to rebuild it
Love that.
completely how we want. And so I know that's overwhelming right now because we're all just trying to get from day to day to day, but this is our opportunity.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree. I think that might be it for questions. We really appreciate you all joining us and for your time today, Marty.
Sure thing. And I'll send that follow-up out this afternoon.
Great. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Take care, everybody.